Welcome to the From Harm to Healing podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jones, and I'm a therapist who runs the From Harm to Healing treatment program, an online program for men who have engaged in infidelity or compulsive sexual behaviors within the context of an intimate relationship. I started this podcast to illuminate some of the common blind spots within the treatment fields for compulsive sexual behavior or sex addiction through the lens of the deceptive sexuality trauma model. I hope you find this resource enlightening, particularly if you're somebody navigating the pain of betrayal and deception for yourself. Thank you for listening to the From Harm to Healing podcast. Today's episode is the third and final part of the recent conversation I had with Trish. And so we've looked at intentional vibe theory, and the second part, we looked at the sound of DST. And now we're really looking at the relationship itself, the injured relationship, and what healing might look like.
What's really important here as we raise consciousness for the partner impacted and also the person who caused harm, as we raise that consciousness, what's really important is to help them catch their breath together and really name that they are now an injured relationship. And how to hold them in that is going to be really important. We have to connect back to the stages of healing. Again, naming it, stage 1, stabilizing the reality of that, stage 2 for the injured relationship, and metabolizing that, the enormity together. You know, they're doing their separate processing, but the relationship, the injury here is where the new air starts to shape. You know, we slow everything down. And each injured relationship I work with, they're all different. Every single one has a different need at this point when they contact me or they do it in intensive with me. Everyone is different. And they're met wherever that is. That's their landing point. And they start to breathe again. And it's not easy. They go back to that every now and then, you know? And it's really important for the two of us, because we hold it this way, is anytime that's there, we name it, we stabilize it, we metabolize. We keep going through 1, 2, and 3 in a healthy way, right? On the stages of healing from deceptive sexuality trauma treatment lens, we move through those so that a clearing and sorting can happen. I mentioned that earlier. It's really important to create new ground. We don't want to create that ground in the injured relationship, that there's still an injury constantly happening.
Which is, as we know, room 20, persistent negative relational patterns, when there isn't that taking a breath. It's like everything's getting faster, everything's speeding up. And when you name the stabilization and then metabolizing, when there's these persistent negative relational patterns, ruptures, there's destabilization happening for both people and for the relationship. And so rather than metabolizing, it's the opposite. We're taking the distressing material and actually adding more distress to it. We're adding more negative emotion to it. And so it's the exact opposite of stabilizing and metabolizing. And we talk about the idea of the relationship itself almost becoming a source of complex trauma shaping for both people at this point, walking on eggshells, waiting for the other shoe to drop, all these ideas that we could use. And so you're naming that the clinical task is to flip that on its head.
Yeah. You know, I go back to what I said earlier, is when the dark cave of unlit truth crashes into the secret sexual basement, there is this excruciating clawing for ground happening, as I mentioned earlier. And there's also this desperate breath happening. That's what's happening in room 20 that you're naming, is Sue Johnson, right? The late Sue Johnson, emotionally focused therapy, right, would say the health of relationship is to pursue. However, the interactional cycles that are happening in this from our lens are withdraw, pursue, attack, attack, pursue, withdraw. I mean, it's all over the map. And right there, how we name that for them and help metabolize that helps and stabilize that helps bring them into creating new, reclaiming a pursue towards intimacy. And we meet that person wherever they're at. It is not a forced intimacy. There is so, attachment styles, right? We talk a lot about that in this field. And when a partner is impacted, right, she might have had a secure enough attachment style. Even though she was in this dark cave of unlit truth, she believed and trusted that person. But when that fragmentation happens, she shatters. And it could become more that disorganized attachment style or highly anxious attachment style. You might see more with the person in the basement, more avoidant or anxious avoidant attachment styles. And then when it crashes open, you're going to see an amplification of that. And then you're going to see more dominance and control happening in that moment because they can't bear that feeling. So you and I know that's what's happening, right? And we meet them wherever they're at. So we don't want to push an avoidant person into intimacy. We want to slowly warm up the space to help them notice the distance in relationship. Usually the person with dominance and control patterns, they're in charge of the relational distance, the homeostasis of the relationship. And we have to break that wide open because we have to empower the relationship to move from injury to a healthy relationship, one that's honest, whole, truthful. I already said honest, but whole, truthful, integrated, right? All those things. Yeah.
And there's something you mentioned, that idea of this kind of clawing, climbing, trying to sort of get out in that phase. And I think that is where so much, especially early after exposure, and when we then go into even symptom progression and the persistent negative patterns, so much of where the men I work with feel attacked, feel like the partner is attacking them, I think we can reframe it through that lens. This isn't attacking. This isn't just trying to hurt you for the sake of it. This is that deep sense of dysregulation, of that crashing in the exposure, and this desperate clawing to try and find truth, to try and piece things back together. Such a different lens than just, I'm being attacked, so I need to withdraw and shut down.
Yeah, it's so painful. You're naming room 7 again, reality ego fragmentation. The clawing for, let this all go away. Please make this all go away. Please, please, please. That clinging. And then the next moment, the pushback. Oh my gosh, you did this. What did you do? Etc. So it's that back and forth that's constantly happening. And then the person who caused harm, that same kind of feeling, clawing. Don't abandon me. I'm changed. I'm never going to do this again. Just those promises without action yet. It's that desperation. We have to teach that as well. There's so much to help them understand what's happening while they're flailing. It's so chaotic for them. Painfully sad.
Yeah, and I think of it like you talked about attachment styles maybe being shifted or empowered, and I think of it like if there's any even slight tendency towards something, this will push that into overdrive. So if there's a tendency to want to submerge or suppress, pull away, stonewall, shut down, when I'm suddenly dealing with the consequences of my secret sexual basement, these incredible, we think of that sound again, that violent kind of sound, my need to, or my desire to withdraw to protect myself is going to go into overdrive. If my tendency is towards externalizing, I'm going to go into overdrive in that. And so you name that, pursue, withdraw, or attack, pursue, all these different dynamic. I think Sue Johnson calls them the sort of dance, the dance of the relationship, the dance between two people. Everyone in a relationship has a sort of dance they follow. But again, it's like this pours gasoline onto that cycle, puts it into overdrive.
I really like what you're naming here is if the person who caused harm, the secret sexual basement behaviors and tactics, those integrity abuse behaviors are increasing, the partner becomes more altered because, again, that altered state is I can't recognize myself. She becomes in a fury of sorts. So if we just hold space for that and imagine the chaos she feels inside and the need to attach or to not have them discard her again and again and again, because those behaviors are discarding behaviors. The stonewalling, the blame shift, the this, that, they're all discarding. And so the wound of being rejected is really huge here for a partner. They've been rejected in the covert phase and didn't know it. And now they're being rejected in all the crashing. It is violent. And I think we want to really help the person who did the harm to not throw violence and call her violent. She feels violent on the inside. Imagine that. She can't find self. Imagine that. It is violent. And that clawing that I described, right? That desperate, panicked need to find attachment somewhere is so palpable, and how we help that injured relationship slow everything down. And they can't even do deep injured relationship until they're stable enough to do it. Because if they're working with me, they're going to go really deep. You know that. You're smiling.
Yeah, they're going to work muscles that they didn't even know they had and go to places they didn't know existed, I think.
Yeah. And they actually feel good about that. They make contact.
Discovering the depths of self that maybe haven't been connected with, maybe ever, but certainly through this process.
And the depth of relationship by really metabolizing the truth of what happened, not say, aren't we over that yet? No, we've just begun. No matter how many times we go through this, please hold me.
You name the violence, that you use that word violence very intentionally a few times. And what's going on inside for the partner is so often like violence. I'm thinking now again of the symptoms in the exposure phase, the triggers, intrusions, re-experiencing, hyperarousal, hypervigilance. That is violent, that is extreme, that is painful. And it's like when we're then thinking of in the relationship where, again, to the men I work with, where it might feel like I'm being attacked. Another way to think about it is another way of saying what you've already said, but it's like this person, it's like they're on fire inside, and then we're asking them to cool down. And actually, no, that heat needs to come out. They are on fire inside. They are not doing this for some ulterior motive. They are not doing it to try and, harm someone or take power. It is an expression of what is going on internally. And until that can be expressed, until that can be contained and held in some way, again, think relationally now, it's almost like maybe it's extending the metaphor. When there's that fire inside, the relationship is going to continue getting burnt by that until it can be contained. There's a proper container around that. So I like really implicitly, really deliberately that you've used that word violence to describe, kind of paint that picture.
Yeah. And now I'm going to say, I love that you're using the cool down. Cool down can be when someone's in that fiery experience, the fury of it all. To tell them to cool down or settle down is actually a form of managing their emotional self, right? It's integrity abuse. So it's like you're just adding fuel to the fire. So it's like, how do we help them understand the complexity of this? I mean, first and foremost, you have two human beings who are fractured beyond, right? Then you have an injured relationship that's fractured beyond. And we're not even talking about the ripple effect, the children, the society, et cetera. We're honing in on these three plates. There is such a deep scarring that's starting to happen on the inside. And how do we catch them in the wound so that they can heal it, clear it, that it doesn't scar over and change them at the deepest part of them. We want to clear that out so that they can have an opportunity for true change inside. If they're choosing each other, if they're choosing to move away from each other, whatever, we want to help them clear, and not, in going back to what you're saying, not fan the flames even more so. help them slow down, hold space for each other, really get to know each other in the pain so that they can get to know each other in the healing. It's the only way. You can't bypass it.
Yeah, and I think linking it to that integrity abuse, you linked it to this idea of managing, like telling someone you need to cool down. First of all, there's a very good chance that's not said out of care for that person. It's maybe primarily said out of the distress I am feeling because of her emotions that are coming up. But we can think of it as, a really important word in this model is this idea of reality, the secret sexual reality, ego fragmentation, reality reconstruction. And the problem in the covert phase is we're not dealing with reality. There's these two realities that are being kept separate. The reality of the basement is being hidden from the partner. And so the integrity abuse is about not dealing with the actual reality as it is, hiding it. And it kind of just came to me that then what we're talking about here in the integrity abuse in the exposure phase, when we're thinking in terms of impacting the relationship and dealing with this stuff, is a continued failure to deal with the reality as it is, because this is the reality of the relationship in the exposure phase. This fire, this violence, these trauma responses, these wounds, this is the reality. So if we're trying to manage that, if we're stonewalling, if we're avoiding it, slamming the door and leaving the room when it comes up, in a much more explicit way, we are still doing the same thing. We are still not dealing with the actual reality as it is in the moment. And that's got to be the heart of so much of the integrity abuse.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I like that you're honing in on reality, right? Because again, abuse victim trauma existing reality is that covert phase. And then we're holding all of it as it continues. And if we don't land and help them land in that moment and life of reality, they're doing that bypass, which creates a fantasy living again. So they're back in the fantasy living instead of, wait a minute, we need to metabolize together what happened to the us, to the we. We never really had a we. We didn't have the opportunity for the we. There wasn't true intimacy. There wasn't true trust. There wasn't true choice. There was abuse. We have to help them land in the reality. And when we do that, I know you know this too, is there's a sigh of relief, although very painful, when we're naming it, because it gives them another drop into the sorrow and grief. Like most, and I'm going to be gender specific, most men that I've worked with who have had secret sexual basements at a very deep level, when they finally get into that landing point of reality and then they drop in, they meet themselves, the cry, they meet the cry. It's actually more than a cry, it's a scream. The sorrow that is unlocking in the room, especially if a partner's there, is such a powerful moment. Such a powerful moment. Because it's so real. It goes back to that rawness, the realness, that showing up vulnerable, being brave to show up vulnerable. It takes a lot of courage to do that.
Courage, vulnerability. It's, again, linking back to a previous episode where I went through the shortish introduction I do to each of the groups that I run, where we talk about self-contact and using the voice. Like if we distill everything down, I felt like I distilled it all down when I had the integrity, intimacy, integration. And then it's like almost distilling down even a little bit more underneath that self-contact and using the voice. But to your point, one of the things I always say in that introduction, I probably said it on that podcast, well, I can't remember exactly, but is it takes courage and vulnerability to genuinely connect with yourself. And that's what you're describing there. Not just what are you thinking? Oh, I'm thinking that the weather's a bit hot today. It's what are you really thinking? What are you feeling? What is going on in your ego, your sense of self right now? What is going on for you? Where are you right now? And really going down through those levels. And again, thinking through the gender lens, we talk about complex gender shaping, the man box. Those are not things that men are socialized to do. We are not socialized to really honor and humanize ourselves in that way. We should be the workhorse. We should be ticking boxes. We should be moving forward. We should be strong. We should be stiff upper lip. So you talking about having, a man, a woman in the room with you, and the man going to that place with his partner there as well, potentially it's a pretty profound thing. I don't think there's many people in the world doing that kind of work, really doing that kind of work. It's quite an honoring thing.
Yeah, I go pretty deep. And I get out of their way at the same time because it's their life together that I hold so sacred. And, Chris, you're naming something also, when you're holding your groups and how I'm watching you speak, because I'm watching you go deeper and deeper in the layers as you're talking about. I can see you kind of with that microscope or that light, the headlamp going down into the depth of somebody, and holding space for them to make self-contact. That microcosm is so important, that they end up in the rooms with other people who are in that same language that resonates with them, because now they don't have to teach somebody else the language. They get to land with somebody who knows it and can hold space for them to have a conversation with themselves, with each other, and empower each other. And I think that's the same with the injured relationship. We're holding a microcosm in the container of a therapeutic intensive or therapy. And I don't think an hour is going to do it. A 50-minute session is not going to do it. It has to be more. You're working with an injured relationship that has high complexity happening, as we've been naming throughout this time today. We need to be able to have them experience that vulnerability, the courage, the willingness to show up, and the feeling like they have some agency, that they can do it out there as well. Practice it, because we're the first landing point for that. They have to go out and work those muscles, right? Practice it. Slow down, not finger point. She said, he said in the session. It's more, wait a minute, let's drop down into the center here. It's not about she did this, he did that. It's more about I feel. This is my experience. What is yours?
The goal is always, we do one of those jobs where your goal is to work yourself out of a job, as in when you can bring them to that place and that kind of work and that way of being in the room, that's a wonderful thing. And then even more wonderful is when that is becoming more their way of being, way of connecting with themselves, their way of being in the relationship. That's not one session or 5 sessions or 10 sessions. That's long-term work. In fact, that's a lifetime's work. I always say to the men in the group, these are pathways: integrity, intimacy, integration, honest, loving, whole. These are all pathways. No one is perfectly honest, perfectly loving, perfectly whole. No one's perfectly integrated. And again, maybe with our fix-it mentality, and maybe I'm speaking particularly as a man here, I don't know, but I want the boxes to tick and the finish line. But actually, there is something profoundly human about always being humble, always knowing there is more growth. But to the point that the real beauty is when you are starting to feel that the clients you're working with, the work you're doing is expanding beyond the room.
I love what you're naming about ticking the boxes. Another time we had a conversation about first order change, second order change. And, yes, we all want to go have those markers of recovery and change and healing. We want those. Those are important. And then we want to go, yes, and, it's about dropping down into the depth of who we are. And like you said, this ongoing evolution of self. How am I shaping forward? Even though the past lurks behind me and every now and then it grabs me, how do I tend to that and then shape forward?
And that idea of kind of getting out the client's way when it's happening as well. You said a really important thing a few minutes ago. Like, yes, there's a huge part the therapist or the treatment provider is playing in creating the condition. I don't want to play that down. I really honor the profession and what we do. But there's also a huge part of getting out of the way. Once the conditions are created, it's not about me, it's not about you, it's about the client in the room. There is something to the organic healing that goes back to that conditions idea. You set the conditions where healing can happen, and then you allow that to flourish. And that's where I say, if that can happen in the relationship as well, the moment the men I'm working with are able to talk about how, we had a really good conversation about that, and we've never been able to speak about that before. I'm so excited when I hear that, because I know the conditions must have been right for that to happen.
To hold steady for that person to, as I was naming, letting it all out, that violence out, is so important, because then they actually have that organic cry that is so needed for that person to go deeper and deeper and deeper. Now, if I were to pull her out into content all the time, that would take her out of that deep drop that she so needed, which is the clearing the path to the self. And I remember sharing in the training just that moment at the end where she's just curled up and there's laughter starting to happen, and she's rolling around even on the floor, just, from the first moments of, pounding the floor to laughter, just that healing, that rebound, that organic rebound. That's our innate healing process. People, when we allow someone to collapse into the reality, back to reality, and move through it, they will find air.
That's the theory of healing, right? And stressing material is coming up, and it is going to come up. It is going to come out in all sorts of ways, in the relationship, in the therapy room. We can then contain that and hold that and create the conditions where the impact of that material can be named. The partner can tell their story, and then the emotions attack, like that story is still there. The information doesn't go away. That happened, and it will never have not happened. But the emotions attached to that material are transformed. That's the metabolizing. Whereas, as we named before, when you're looking at room 20, persistent negative relational patterns, what is really happening there is that distressing material is coming up. It is not being held. It is not being contained. It is being batted back and forth like a tennis match that's getting ever faster with each hit. And there is more negative emotion attached to it. So that is these conditions. That is the key. It's something so simple sounding, holding space, containing. But there's such a profound depth to being able to do that. But that is where the healing comes.
Yeah, tying in with you there, the room 20, the relational patterns that are so jarring, the beating up, the piling up on top of already the fragmentation that you're naming. If we keep piling up with them and we keep getting caught in that content, it's going to be a longer dig for them. And something I did in my last in-person intensive, I was showing the women in the group emotional granularity. And I was doing this with my fingers, putting my fingers together, the fingertips, the thumb and the fingertips, kind of moving it really slowly and saying, this is emotional granularity. And they said, oh, and so they all started doing it. They're like, oh, they're fingerprints. And it's like the fingerprint of emotion, so unique to every person, that if we slow down long enough and honor it and hold it with dignity, I think that's going to be the teaching point for them, is how do I slow down with this, my person who I've decided I'm choosing to work this through right now. How do I slow down and really go land in the reality of their fingerprint, and not pile up on top of it. Let me get to know this part of them. And it can be really scary to do that, to see someone else's emotional fingerprint in that moment.
This is part of the nuance of the work as well. Part of the humanization. We have these rooms, we have clinical labels, but when we go into each of these rooms, everybody's story might be slightly different. The rooms exist because there is overlap. There are consistent injuries that occur. But thinking of that emotional fingerprint idea, every human being is unique. It's part of the beauty of this work. So that's another principle I talk about with a lot of the men I work with, that you have to learn your partner. So I can't tell you what your partner needs in each situation. That would be me losing humility, assuming that I know. So again, there's something in that condition of humility of learning. I love that idea, the emotional fingerprint. I realize I'm doing it now. I'm rolling my fingers as I talk.
Yeah. Emotional granularity. Yeah.
It's funny, you mentioned a minute ago about us acting it out, and I notice myself doing it now. Like, I feel like I could have you on mute and I'd know what you were talking about because I can just see you kind of physically acting it out,
Yes.
and it's making me think of that vibe idea again. We talk about the body language, the tone of voice, the eye contact, the movement. I think I see the passion you have for this just in physically how you are on the call. There's such an authenticity to that, and again, I think there's a physical element when you're talking about having an injured relationship in the room with you. You're talking about going to that emotional place. I'm sure there are significant physical responses, physical changes. There's a vibe coming from the person that something really important is happening in this moment.
Very much so. I only do the injured relationship work in person because you bring the whole of them there. And in those quiet moments, you see the whole story and you teach them to listen at that level, you know? Um, I'm giggling too because I'm like, we've been going a long time and you and I can go really deep. We could probably even go deeper. And I'm like, we're like in the vein again. We're down in the deep river somewhere, and it's so beautiful there. There's something so precious and beautiful about helping another person develop the capacity to go there and feel the richness inside of them that they never felt before, especially someone who's created a basement and someone who lived in a dark cave of unlit truth. They didn't have they didn't have the healing relational space that said, wow, what is there for us to explore together in this new place we find ourselves in? Because it can be it can be very lush in there when they slow down, when they land in emotional granularity, when they listen to the other breathing, when they pause, when they gaze. A whole other thing happens when they look in each other's eyes. It's like you can almost see their foreheads drop and their body kind of drop. And like you named earlier, it's not this perfect rhythm. It's back and forth, constant back and forth, old story to new story, constant. The old is so practiced, we've named in other times we've talked, and the new takes a moment. And to keep reminding them every now and then when things feel like it's going backwards, how do they together rebound, not leave each other in those moments?
That's part of the safety, the holding, that even aiming when it's normal. We're not necessarily doing anything wrong when the past is coming up again. And one of the signs of real healing happening is that we can deal with that. We know we're building an attachment, we're building a foundation where we've got this. Like when the past comes up, we can honor it. We don't need to minimize it, but we also don't need to be as terrified of it, as dysregulated maybe as we were. And again, we're talking here, I'm always aware of people listening at different stages of recovery. We're talking sometimes quite far down the line. This is hard work. Again, I'm thinking of men I speak to in consultations who I will often get asked the question, what does this look like down the line? Like, how long does this take? And maybe again, some of that fixing mentality coming in. How long does it take? Is it worth it even, might come in as a question. I often think my view is, firstly, I wouldn't do this work if I didn't think you could see beautiful healing down the line. And if I didn't see that down the line for many people, but I will often be quite maybe uncomfortably honest with people and say, it will probably take longer than you think. It will probably be a lot harder than you think. You'll probably have to do a lot more work than you think. But it can, I believe, be also more beautiful than you probably think. Because maybe if you've had a long-term secret sexual basement, long-term disconnection from the self, maybe you've never ever experienced actually being known and in genuine intimacy, both with yourself and with another. So it's kind of a mixed message. It's harder, it's longer, it's deeper, but I think it can be more profound as well if you would really do the work.
Yeah, and you can meet the injured relationship at many different stages too, right? They're not going to just go really quick into the deep dive that you're naming. It takes a moment to stabilize and begin to have the conversation around metabolization. And then the evolution of relationship can happen. But I'm with you, it's ongoing and you have to really want it, like deep down inside. No one can tell you to have it. You have to tap into that ache inside of you that truly wants it instead of staying in a state of longing, not having.
I feel like as I zoom out a bit, it feels like I know we're coming towards the end of our time anyway, but it feels organically like that's happening also. And it was making me think about stages. This is a very different thing, but we talked about the stages of DST and we've talked about the slow hum, we've talked about the violence, and I'm thinking even with our conversation, I notice it. We come in and there's the connection and the sort of vibe happening, introducing the information. Then we're really getting into the depth of it and probably going up and we're becoming very animated. And I noticed there in these last few minutes, we're both kind of we've just organically slowed down. Our voices have slowed down a bit. And it's just an interesting thing. I say that for no particular reason, but just to note that that is this vibe idea. The vibe even throughout our call is changing.
I love that. I love that because I was vibing in as well there, like feeling into that space, feeling satiated, feeling good, feeling we've unlocked a lot. And I hope that everyone got something from this. We see them, we hear them, we feel them. I just hope that everyone is okay. And I'm so grateful for you, Chris, and for inviting me again here. I love it. At first, I'm like, I don't know, me. And then I'm like, yes, because our lives are so busy.
It's always an open invitation. The feedback I get is always so encouraging. So yeah, as you said, I hope people are able to hear this, receive this, sit with emotions it might bring up, but ultimately experience, whether it's hope, whether it's peace, whether it's illumination, experience something positive, even amongst difficult emotions that might come up from this kind of talk.
Well, I feel so honored to have met you through the model and have been with Omar for so long that I just feel so deeply grateful for our connection and that we get to continue to chew on and help others understand the model that is so rich and layered and born of the people, which is amazing. Really deep listening happening. So, and we do that well with each other. We listen.
Yeah, the model, as we know, comes from the combined voices of many, many people who have walked this journey. And I think that's why it contains such an authentic rawness, but beauty as well. And as we, again, come to the end of our time today, again, perhaps if you're comfortable doing so, perhaps you could lead us out of the space again in the way that you led us into it.
Okay, will do. So I invite everyone to honor this conversation and their listening and whatever tapped in for them, to be tender with themselves and create a safe container to hold this around them like a membrane. Notice that. Notice your breath. And as we honor, both Chris and I honor all of you, I honor you, Chris, as well. And I invite us all to take a breath together. Inhale deeply. Exhale, settle. Inhale deeply. Exhale, clear the space. Going back into your life outside of here. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the From Harm to Healing podcast. If you'd like to find out more information about the deceptive sexuality trauma model itself, you can visit minwalamodel.com. If you're interested in the services that I offer, in particular the From Harm to Healing treatment program, please visit chrisjonestherapy.co.uk.